Good morning. I'm Annie from Counselling for Yeovil, one of the therapists there and on the leadership team there. And this morning I'm going to start a short series, 2 or 3 sessions on anxiety. So this is your introduction to anxiety. You might say you don't need me to introduce you to anxiety, but that's our topic today, and hopefully this will help not to aggravate the situation. So we're looking first of all at reasons why we may be anxious. And it's worth spending a little bit of time. You can even pause the video and think about it. What are the background reasons why you may be anxious? You may have a genetic disposition towards anxiety. Doesn't mean that anxiety is inevitable, but there may be something in the genes that disposes you towards it. That's okay. All of these things that we're going to talk about are all things you can get help with. Okay. It may be that your personal temperament or your personal temperament might be more of an anxious one. We've already established that in our house, Mike, my husband, is the optimist, and I tend to be the I like to call it realist, but maybe your outlook on life has become quite negative and anxiety inducing. You can do something about that and practice looking at life differently. It may be that go back to how you were brought up, and let me be clear: we're not wasting time blaming parents for how we are, because they probably did their best. But that's different from noticing the impact that aspects of our childhood can have on us. So it may be that when you look back at your childhood, you were brought up in ways which induced anxiety. It may be that your childhood was very chaotic and not very safe, or it may be that you had very strict punishments for getting it wrong or for making mistakes. Also, look at what was modelled by your parents. Perhaps one or both of your parents were very anxious, and so growing up, you learnt to look at the world in a way, in an anxious way. So worth just spending a little bit of time wondering about that and thinking about that. Past experiences, of course, can make us anxious. If you've had a really bad experience in some area of life, then you're going to be anxious next time you face that area of life. Later on, we'll look at different parts of the brain and how they affect anxiety. And there's one part of your brain that is there to keep you safe. And if you had a bad experience, even if you can't remember the experience, that part of your brain may well be triggering that you're in a dangerous situation when you don't realize that you are, or don't think that you are logically, but you feel anxious. So we'll go into that more later. Of course, current circumstances can make us very anxious, though I would say that if you haven't got the historic tendency towards anxiety or training in anxiety, then you're likely to cope better with current circumstances with less anxiety, depending on the circumstances, than somebody who is already quite an anxious person. But current circumstances, I mean, they might be things like your age or your hormones, or they might be caffeine. Maybe caffeine or alcohol, sugar is adding to anxiety. So it's worth checking out always. There may even be an illness that is making you anxious or contributing to it. So it's always worth, I think, going to the GP and just checking out, is there a medical reason that might be contributing or causing your anxiety? It's a both and situation. It's not likely to be that, but it might be, so it's worth checking it out, and at the same time working on your mental health as well. So other current circumstances that might make you anxious: if you are working too hard or have too much pressure on you at work, if you are not very good at setting boundaries. Boundaries are really important in life. In counselling, they're a big deal. And so most counsellors, if you know any, will go on about boundaries. Setting your boundaries in the right places to look after yourself actually helps look after other people too. It's not always kinder to be or claim to be fully available for everybody all the time, for example. For one, you can't, and so you'll let people down. For two, maybe it's not what they need. Perhaps they need the opportunity to be more independent. And for three, it's not good for you. It's going to overstretch you, and then you can't do what you do well. You do a lot of things badly if you overstretch yourself. So boundaries in various ways are important. Saying, okay, this is work and I do this at work. Now I'm home, I stop. That's another important boundary, for example. Low self-worth can cause us to be very anxious. If you've already got an underlying feeling that there's something a bit wrong with you, that you're not as good as other people, not as clever as other people, that you tend to get things wrong, that you're not good enough, that will add to anxiety. So some work to help you to rethink that would be important. And perfectionism, there's another one. You will know two people who can be in the same situation, and one of them's anxious about it and the other one isn't. And one of many reasons for that can be perfectionism. I know people who get very stressed if they haven't dusted their dining room. I don't. If I haven't dusted my dining room, when I haven't dusted my dining room, it doesn't cause me a moment's anxiety. But if it does, it can cause a lot of anxiety. Some people can be very miserable about things that perhaps they need help to readjust their expectations of life, because some of those things might not matter. At the moment, obviously, the coronavirus is causing a lot of extra anxieties, health and food shortages, or not being able to get out, and the isolation itself, work and money concerns, and technology concerns. Technology, wonderful as it is, also causes a lot of stress and anxiety. Maybe you've put something up on social media, on a WhatsApp chat, or something like this, and nobody's said they liked it or watched it or commented on it in a good way, or somebody's made an unpleasant comment. And people do on some of the social media. I've had one or two recently that would make your toes curl. And it's really hard, or maybe it's the technology itself, which doesn't work, or you're not very good at it. Anyone my age, and I'm going to tell you what that is, but you might work it out. Computer studies, as we used to call them, came in the year after me at school. So I've always felt that I'm on the drive, trying to keep up, trying to catch up as far as technology is concerned. And if you're older than me and it's a real stretch, it can be really stressful to try and work out the technology, feel that you're missing out because you can't log into something or join in with something. And you might feel stupid, or you might feel left out or very stressed. So that in itself can cause quite a lot of anxiety. If you've got a big decision to make and you're not making it, that can cause a lot of anxiety too. And there are ways that you can get help to make decisions. We might do more on that another time, but yes, there are advantages to not making the decision because you don't take any risks. If you say yes to one thing, you say no to something else, that can feel like a big risk. The fear of getting it wrong can keep you paralyzed. There are also a huge number of disadvantages to not making a decision. So at some level, we need to accept we might make a mistake. That's being human. We have to take a risk, and it's not good for us to never make the decision either. It holds us back. So all of those are things which might be causing you anxiety, and I'm sure there are many others. Certainly at the Counselling for Yeovil Centre, anxiety is the number one reason why people come to see us. And in the country as a whole, anxiety is the top mental health reason why people go to see their GP. And often it's combined with depression, because let's face it, if you feel really anxious, which is a miserable feeling, for a length of time, you can start to get depressed about it. So it may go together with depression. So just to put that in context, some anxiety is the price you pay for living. And it's normal. I don't like the word normal, but it's normal. We all feel some anxiety. Some anxiety is even necessary and useful. If we never felt anxious about anything, then we wouldn't make the changes that we probably need to make. So it's okay to be anxious. When anxiety is holding you back and making you miserable, then let's try and do something about it. There's lots that can be done. If you're suffering from OCD or PTSD or panic attacks or phobias, hopefully there'll be something in these videos which will be really helpful. But You may also want some more specific help for you. And with any of these forms of anxiety or generalized anxiety, you may want to go and get one-to-one help so that you can have help which is specifically related to you and your situation rather than a general talk. This will be an introduction. It might help you to work out what you want to do. But if you suffer from anxiety, you will know the symptoms. You might sweat, you might have a racing heart, you might blush, you might find that your head is in a constant spin and that you can't think straight, or you might worry something round and round and round and not be able to let go of it. You might find that you can't sleep. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. You might feel shaky or sick or just tense and have a headache or a jaw ache or a shoulder ache, which doesn't go away because you are carrying so much tension there. You might need to urinate a lot more than usual or feel that you do, or have diarrhea or an upset stomach. You might just feel you can't enjoy life. You can't relax. You can't just sit in the living room with a beer and a TV program and relax and let yourself relax. It's really hard to do. And you might what was the other one that I was going to say? I've lost it. Never mind. That's enough. Oh, avoidance. You might find that you're avoiding situations, and it's not helpful actually to avoid situations. More of that later. So there we go. You'll be familiar with those if you suffer from anxiety. We'll say more about sleep in a different video, I think. But trying to understand your reasons and your triggers for a moment is a good idea. It might be social anxiety. Maybe it's fear of going outside, it's some kind of phobia. Maybe it's performance fear, that you feel very anxious when you have to do something like this. Possibly some people might. Maybe it's assertive interactions that make you anxious. If you're a boss and you have to manage people, or if you're working for someone and they're not being fair on you and you need to challenge them, those sort of situations can make you very anxious. But think what's beneath it. What's beneath it? Just for a few moments. If you can't work it out, it doesn't matter. You don't need to be able to get help, but it is useful to try and understand yourself. Right deep down, there might be a core belief about yourself, a belief you've always had that you don't really question because you're so used to it, that you're not good enough. Or there might be a fear of failure. I'm really anxious because I don't want to make a mistake or I don't want to fail. If those sort of things are going on, it might be worth having a bit of help to work out, okay, so how do I view failure? What do I think about failure? Why is that such a big deal? For me, failure is not a bad thing. It's inevitable. If we are trying to do things and move forwards and do things which stretch us, we're going to fail sometimes, and that's okay. That just shows that we're pushing ourselves onto new things. Anyone who's tried to pass their driving test, you might have failed before you passed. In the end, you pass if you keep going. And because you failed once doesn't make it inevitable that you will fail again. In fact, the opposite, I would say the more practice you get, the less likely you are to fail. And the people who get there in the end are not the ones that have failed, they're the ones that haven't given up. So let's think differently about failure. I think it's a badge of honor, but if you've really tried to do something that's pushed your edges, you might well have failed, but have you managed to pick yourself up and keep going? I think Winston Churchill quoted something about success is going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm, something like that. You can look it up. Winston Churchill quotes are all over the place, most of them very good. So if you've had a chance to think about that a little bit, I just want to say two more things before I finish, because I'm running out of time for this first one. The second one will focus on specific things we can do to help us. But I want you to think about these things first. There are two parts of our brain that operate with anxiety. One is the cortex, which is particularly the frontal cortex, which is our thinking, rational part of our brain. And the other is the amygdala, which is kind of buried in the middle there, which is our prehistoric, instinctive part of our brain, and they both operate in different ways with anxiety, and we will look into that in the next section. But just before I go, there are some situations that they don't change easily, and they really do matter. And so this is not life is not just about conquering our anxiety about things. We have real issues that we need to sort out, and I'm not minimizing those things at all. You may be bullied at work. You may have a loved one who is very ill. You may have a long-term health problem. These are not easy situations, and they need help and support to get through. They're not just about your anxiety, but if you can conquer your anxiety or get better at dealing with your anxiety, you will actually deal better with the situations. They won't go away, but you will deal better with them. And so we've said before, half the problem is the situation that you're in, and the other half is your attitude towards it. And so our anxiety can come into our attitude towards the situation, even if the situation itself is difficult. But you can have a plan, and you can take it step by step to deal with your difficult situation, and you can practice. And if something doesn't work, you can creatively think of another way to deal with it, and you can put that in. You can have the resilience not to give up, but you can do that a lot better when you're not tied up with anxiety. Most situations people deal with differently. For example, a child being bullied at school. I can remember once one of our children had been pushed over in the playground, and I sat them down and said, well, if that happens again, you need to go and find a teacher, and you need to ask the teacher to. And I took it very seriously and sincerely. A bit later on, I had my husband talking to him, and he said, oh, well, if that happens again, just push them over back. They won't do it again. And up to you which you think is the best solution. That's not the point. The point is, my husband was much more chilled about it. These things happen. To some extent, get used to it and learn how to deal with it. Mine was much more sympathetic, but probably much more anxious. So we deal with things in different ways, and if we can get on top of our anxiety, then we can deal with things better, even very difficult things. So you've got your GP, you've got counselling, you've got friends, you've got medical advice, you might need assertiveness training, you might want support from your friends or your boss, but get help. If you need medication for anxiety, have medication for anxiety as a short-term solution, because it can help you to get calm enough to then be able to do the work you need to do to make the permanent changes. So if you had a headache, you would take tablets. If you've got anxiety, nothing wrong with taking tablets if they make you feel well enough to then do the work you need to do to make long-term changes. A lot of anxiety is about us learning better ways to deal with it. So don't give up. There's a lot of help available for anxiety. Don't give up, and don't suffer alone. Okay, I'll see you soon for the next episode. Bye.